Okay, so we're going to begin. So again, first and foremost, welcome to this webinar. This is our virtual DPO and virtual security officer webinar that we run on a monthly basis to give everyone insight into the general data protection regulation, but also other aspects of security as well. So I do cover all manner of different areas in these webinars. Today, we'll cover a specific area of GDPR, which many people have asked us about. So I thought it would be useful to go through it in a little bit of detail. We are, of course, running very close to the end of 2018. So GDPR has been in place for some time. So it will be interesting to know where you are on your journey with GDPR, because it's been in place now for 6 months. Many people said to us at the beginning of the year that it was all hype and it was all the next Y2K and such, and indeed many people treat it as such. They got to the 25th of May and stopped. Is that you? Am I describing you here? If it is, then you have had 6 months where your compliance has been dropping. I made the analogy many moons ago that GDPR is a little bit like a diet. And if you start the year out saying, I'm going to go on a diet because I'm going to get ready for my summer holidays, and you follow all the diet plans and you do all your training and you do all the right things up until your holiday, you have your holiday, and then you do nothing for the rest of the year, then guess what? You're going to start all over again in the new year. So I hope that's not you. I hope you have kept on top of your compliance program. This presentation is part of that. You can use these presentations internally to raise awareness on certain aspects of GDPR. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the detail of this now so that we can all get on with our days. So I'm going to turn my video off because you don't need to be looking at me. Hopefully you can still hear me and we can still go through this. So that would be great. So this is what our agenda. We're going to go through what's new this month. We're going to go through the ICO news and incidents. We're going to talk about a particular topic, and it's processing data lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. What is that, and how do we do it? And then, of course, at the end, we have opportunity for questions if we have time. So without further ado then, we need to get into the news. So what's been happening? Well, the big news of the week at the moment is that we start with the fact that Uber have been fined. They've received their fine from the ICO. They've been fined £385,000. Now, the reason they were fined is that, if you're unaware of this, they had a data breach back in November of 2016. And in 2016, they were attacked by hackers, and they had a breach that affected almost 3 million British users of their services. They obtained credentials to Uber's cloud servers and downloaded 16 large files, including records of 35 million users worldwide. So whilst 3 million British users were affected, 35 million people worldwide. These records included information such as full names, phone numbers, email addresses, and location data as well. The drivers themselves were also affected, with 3.7 million of the drivers being affected, having their data stolen. And that included drivers' license numbers as well. And in the UK, 82,000 people were actually, drivers were actually affected. So it's a considerable breach. Now, the compounding issue around this, and again, all these things are linked, is the fact that that Uber itself didn't actually notify anybody of the breach. They didn't inform any of the 3.7 million drivers affected, or the 3 million British users affected, or indeed the 35 million people worldwide. What they actually did, amazingly enough, is they conspired with the hackers, the attackers themselves, and they actually paid them an additional $1,000 as bug bounty so that they could hide the actual breach itself. So in actual fact, I guess you could say the real breach cost them £485,000. Well, in actual fact, in reality, we need to remember that in September, Uber in the US were forced to pay compensation to those drivers that I mentioned. And they had to pay them a compensation of $148 million. Now, there's a whole host of information about this Uber breach online. I would urge you to go and take a look at it because it is quite interesting to see what has actually happened and the ramifications of it. As I said, they colluded with the hackers to try and keep it quiet. That didn't work, and therefore they received considerable fines and compensation claims. Now, that's because they weren't being transparent. As I said, everything is linked. It all comes back to this about processing data lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. Now, when it comes to being transparent, of course, we can't have the news without mentioning Facebook. And Facebook, again, this month have received their fine for their involvement with Cambridge Analytica and the developers involved with Cambridge Analytica as well, for not obtaining sufficient consent from users to use our data for specific reasons. Now, this announcement on Thursday, it actually upholds a decision that was made in July. So in July, it was a £500,000 fine. Facebook said that's not fair. And the ICO said, yes, it is. And therefore, the fine stands and you have to pay. Now, as you probably could see there, you know, this is a fairly small number compared to what we hear about under GDPR. And the reason we need to understand that or see that it's that number is because they were actually fined under the old regulation. I'm just going to pause for a second here just to remind people who've just come online that, first of all, these sessions are recorded so they can be used in your own presentations. And also just to explain that I am getting over a bout of man flu. So apologies if I'm having to take copious amounts of water. I hope you'll forgive me for that because I do a lot of talking on these things. So moving on to this this point around the fines, we talk about these fines because for good reason. Under GDPR rules, if GDPR had been in place when this occurred with Cambridge Analytica, the fine could have been up to £1.2 billion, which gives you some pause for thought around the fines for these larger organisations, and hopefully for people like Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg himself. Because it's important to recognise, again, this transparency and the lawfulness and being fair with people's data. Rules have been broken for far too long. You know, and we focusing on Facebook for just a moment, you know, would you say that Facebook plays fair in the way that it uses data? Is it open and transparent? Well, I personally don't think it does. I don't think it ever did. I think as long as you understand what it's doing and how it operates, I think that's important. But even I find myself amazed sometimes when I hear some of the news that surrounds these larger organizations and how and what they're doing with the data that we share, or indeed with the platforms that we use. Now, what I'm talking about here specifically is, again, an incident, an event, if you like, that was revealed in 2014, so 4 years ago. But it was all based about an experiment that happened back in 2012, when it was revealed that Facebook had actually manipulated users' moods in a secret experiment. Now, let that sink in for a moment. You know, what they actually did was, you know, the experiment, you know, which researchers working for Facebook did not gain specific consent. It provoked massive amounts of concern around, you know, privacy experts like myself and ethical concerns by ethic specialists and experts themselves. But what they did is, for 1 week back in 2012, Facebook effectively skewed nearly 700,000 users' news feeds. And what they did was they either made them happier or sadder than normal. So what they did was they injected onto 700,000 users' platforms either very positive stories or very distressing stories and very sad and negative stories. And the experiment found that after the experiment was over, that those users then tended to post more negative or more positive comments according to the way that they had been skewed. Now, obviously the researchers promote distress, because of the manipulation that involved. And it shows that, that emotional contagion, as it's known, can be transferred through networks without any interaction with individuals. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't think you need an experiment to tell me that if my news feed is full of negative stories, that I'm going to be feeling quite low and negative. Or if it's filled with very positive images of puppies and sunshine and happy Christmas stories, then perhaps that's going to make me a lot happier kind of individual. But what it did do is it gave Facebook back in 2012 enough information to say we can manipulate people's view of the world and their emotions by feeding them certain kinds of information. Now, how could that information be possibly used to no good? How could it possibly be manipulated and used for someone's ill-gotten gains? I'll leave that there for a second. So, being fair, being lawful, and being transparent on how we're using data is really important. So we'll move on to just some more general news. Again, just for because it's coming up to Christmas, we all should be aware that glitches can happen, bad things can happen. Amazon was hit with a major data breach just days before its Black Friday, its sales, its big sales day. It was a completely, fluke event, if you like. They suffered a major data breach because what they did was, what happened was, it had customer names and addresses disclosed on the website, and it affected users, of course, but it was down to a glitch on the site itself. It wasn't a hack, it wasn't a breach in that perspective, it was a technical issue. They resolved it very quickly, but they notified individuals and explained to them what the level of risk was. They were being open, they were being transparent. I think that's really, really key and important. So we're now going to move on to the actual mainstay of this webinar so that you have a view of what we're here to talk about. And the first part I'm going to look at is, what do we mean by lawful? Under GDPR, what is it? And under data protection, what do we mean by lawful? Well, I'll be honest with you, if you have to ask the question, what is lawful, then we need to only look at what we should have been doing for over 20 years. Under the Data Protection Act 1998, it's always said that data shall be processed fairly and lawfully, which is something that we should always have had. We have that now. We have the regulation which says that it should be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. What does GDPR specifically say about this? Well, it states that any processing of personal data should be lawful and fair. It should be transparent to natural persons that personal data concerning them are collected, used, consulted, or otherwise processed, and to what extent the personal data are or will be processed. The principle of transparency requires that any information and communication relating to the processing of those personal data be easily accessible and easy to understand, and that clear and plain language be used. Now, this is why I love GDPR, because it is clear and it uses plain language. It's not mixed with legalese, it really isn't. So again, I always urge people, if you are struggling with GDPR, read GDPR. But in essence, all that GDPR is asking for, or data protection is asking for, or indeed you and I are asking for, is that people really weigh up the use of data, how they're using it and what they're doing with it. We hear a lot of people talk about, well, it's in my legitimate interest as a company to use your data, to do these things with it. And yes, that is true very often, but I would also add that it's a balancing act between the rights of individuals to privacy and the ability of the organization to use that data for purposes of their business. So I completely agree there will be many times where you have a legitimate interest to use someone's data. And we shouldn't run fear of using someone's data if they have given us a lawful basis to which to process that. And what does that look like? Well, again, if you're new to GDPR, you may be new to some of these articles, but Article 6, paragraph 1 states that processing shall be lawful only if and to the extent that at least one of the following applies. There are actually 6 bases upon which you can process data. The first is that the data subject has given consent to the processing of his or her personal data for one or more specific purposes. The second is that processing is necessary for the purpose of a contract to which the data subject is party, or in order to take steps at the request of the data subject prior to entering into a contract. And then processing is necessary for compliance with legal obligations, which the controller is subject. Now, before we move on, I'm just going to very quickly focus on 2 or 3 of these things here and simply say that under GDPR, these are very clear. Again, I think they're fairly concise. If I was rewriting GDPR now, I would actually have placed consent at the bottom of this list, because everybody seems to have got stuck on that first basis, thinking you have to have consent for absolutely everything to process data. That is not true. If you are operating under consent, it means that you are giving a user additional rights. It may not be, consent may not be in the best interest of the data subject either. You can't ask somebody who's having a heart attack if it's okay for you to take their name and telephone number so that you can contact somebody, for instance. Now, that may sound flippant, but I genuinely have heard people talk about perhaps we need a process in place to deal with these circumstances. It's ridiculous. Look at the reasons why you might want to process someone's data and find an appropriate lawful basis, and could be one of these 6 that I'm showing you, we'll have showed you in a few moments. Processing is necessary for the performance of a contract. If I come to you as a customer, and I sign a contract with you, for instance, if you are a law firm or an accountant, then you need to have some information from me. You do not need to gain my consent to collect the information, because I have just entered into a contract with you, and by the very nature, I need to then provide that information to you. So all I will say on this around processing data lawfully, you do absolutely need to choose one of these 6. And we'll come on to the second 3 now, but you have to be very clear about it and understand what that is. So processing is necessary in order to protect the vital interests of the data subject. That would be a vital interest being for life and limb. Processing is necessary for the performance of a task carried out in the public interest or in the exercise of official authority vested in the controller. Processing is necessary for the purposes of legitimate interests. Now, the legitimate interest piece I've already mentioned and talked about that briefly. There is what's known as a legitimate interest assessment that you should perform. You can Google that. Again, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into every single one of these in vast amounts of detail, but you can absolutely Google it, review it. If you have any questions, feel free just to email me and I'll answer anything I possibly can. But going and looking at these for a second, the vital interest goes back to that health and safety perspective. If it's in somebody's vital interest, it's in their, if it's in their best interest that you are processing that data, then clearly that organisation has a lawful basis to process it. If, for instance, you can't go to the NHS, to your doctors, and say, I want to exercise my right to be forgotten, because one, they never asked for your consent to hold that information, and secondly, absolutely, it is being processed in order to protect your interests. It's all well and good you saying, I want you to forget about me, and then having a car accident and suddenly nobody knows anything about you in terms of your health, your blood type, or etc., etc. So again, it's about making sure that you consider this in your own organization. Do you know what your lawful basis for processing data is? And I will again say this several times for anybody who's just joined us a little bit late, but what we're saying here is that on the 25th of May this year, many people were saying, yes, absolutely, I know my basis for processing data. We're 6 months in now. When was the last time you looked at this? Are you processing data differently than you were 6 months ago? I warrant, that you probably are. You quite possibly are. So take a look at that. Time for a reassessment. What is fair and transparent? We need to keep on top of this. We need to ensure that we are always lawful. We have to, understand what does fair mean and what does being transparent mean. Well, under, again, personal data, Article 5, personal data shall be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner, but it will also be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes. Now, you could argue that every single one of the principles under Article 5 does actually fall into this. But for me personally, I think it's this second principle which I think really plays into this point about demonstrating that you are collecting data for specified reasons. Is it fair that you're holding that information on me for extended periods of time? Is it fine? Have you told me what you're going to do with that data? And do I think it's legitimate? What I always say to people is, is what you're doing with data likely to be a surprise to those people or a shock that you are collecting data from? Are you doing something that they aren't aware of? Again, poor old Facebook or good old Facebook, whichever way you want to look at it, is there an obvious example where they have collected data and they're using it clearly for their own purposes? It's been said in many seminars, and I will make no apology for repeating it. We don't receive bills from Facebook for a very simple reason. We are the product. We are being sold. And as long as we understand that and we're very clear about that transaction, then that's fine. But the moment we start becoming parts of secret experiments, that's where I get that's my expression, the shock and horror and annoyance of that arrogance that somebody says, I will do with your data whatever I feel necessary to make money from you, I feel is wrong. I hope you feel the same. Now, many people at this point will say, yes, but, if you've read the terms and conditions, then it's fine. And, when people talk about being transparent, they say, well, hey, we have a privacy notice. I always ask the question, is it clear? And indeed, GDPR asks the same question. It actually states that it has to be clear and using plain language. When you look at the media giants, for instance, if we just take a look at this image here, this is actually an art installation in France. An artist took WhatsApp, Google, Tinder, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram's privacy notices and printed them out. And then at the end of the line, you simply have agreed to all of that. Now, I don't know which social media platforms you are on. You may be on all of them. You may be on one or two of them. But I'll ask you the question, have you read those privacy notices? And would you say it's fair that they are using our data in the way that they want to use that data? I would warrant that's no. But like policies, we need to ensure that we go back and look at these privacy notices, the ones that we've signed up to, absolutely, but also the ones that we're giving out to our customers as well. So one way to do that, in actual fact, here's a tip and a trick, is to get someone that you know and trust and get them to sit down with your privacy notice and get them to read it afresh with clear eyes. Somebody who doesn't really know your business, not someone internally, not your HR department, not your finance team, not someone from legal or risk, but someone outside the business. Get them to review, excuse me, get them to review this and see if they actually meet with the obligations set out in GDPR. GDPR sets it out, Article 14, very clear. It has these stipulations, what information should be given or provided when data is obtained. And it's this kind of thing that you need to be pointing out. The purposes of the processing for which personal data are intended, as well as the legal basis for the processing. This is Article 14. Article 13 pretty much says the same thing, and both stipulate how or what personal data shall be provided to the data subject, either when it's directly taken from them or when it's obtained from other sources. You have to be clear about that. So you also need to be clear about other areas as well. There are, obligations based upon the controller. For instance, the controller shall provide the data subject with the following information necessary to ensure fair and transparent processing in respect of the data subject. All of that information should be provided. And this all leads to this feeling or sense of being playing fair, being transparent, and being open and honest. And in any relationship, that's what we're really looking for, whether that be a personal relationship or a business relationship. We talk about trust, and we talked about trust before. Excuse me one second. We talked about this in the last session, and it's about building trust and maintaining that trust. And I firmly do believe that being fair and transparent, is the only way you can build trust in us, or lose it. These things are a continuing process. It's a journey, and one we need to take each and every single day. We can't simply point to 25th of May 2018 and say I was trustworthy then, or we were being fair then, or we were being transparent then. So we need to make sure that we're doing it now. New processes, new people, new systems will have been introduced into your organization, most likely in the last 6 months. And I've just mentioned there that I think this is a bit of a journey. And as I was putting this presentation together the other day, I was traveling through London, and I saw, what I thought was quite interesting, TfL, Transport for London Rail. And I thought, well, actually, that's quite nice. I think we should change it to TfL, transparent, fair, and lawful data. That's what we're all looking for, because good data protection, as I've already said, it is a journey, and it's a journey that we should be taking each and every single day, and watching which stops we get off at, who's getting off, what new things are happening, what's coming in, what's leaving us. And that's what we should be doing. So in final steps then, in summary, if you like, I'm going to simply say this: the steps you need to be taking: ensure your lawful basis for processing is known, understood, and documented. Review your privacy notices to ensure they are clear and transparent. And ask yourself, are we being fair to our customers, our clients, our employees? And that's where I'm going to leave this now. I always say at the end, there's a call to arms, a call to actions. Well, guess what? Your call to actions are go away and ensure your lawful basis for processing is known and understood. Review your privacy notices to ensure they're clear, and ask yourself that question. Now, I'm going to open this up to your good selves now, and ask if you have any questions. If you do, it would be great to hear from you. So if you do have some questions, feel free to shout out now, or we will come to a close on this webinar. Okay, that's fine. Not a problem. So, okay, what we're just going to go through now is next month. What do we want to go through? Well, I did ask, and I always ask this question, if anyone has any suggestions what they would like to know about next month, please let me know. And this was a suggestion that was made to me about raising awareness. It's a very important topic, keeping that awareness there. What tools do we have? What tips and what tricks do we have? Essentially, we're looking to change culture. And that's what we're going to cover next month. I will let you know the dates. Obviously, we're into December, and we're into Christmas period. So hopefully we'll try and get a date where everybody can make it. And hopefully you can share this with your teams as well. Thanks once again for you attending. It really is appreciated. And I look forward to speaking to you at some point in the near future. If there is anything that I can help with, then feel free to let me know. If there's anything that you would like me to include and cover going forward, I would love to hear from you. Thanks once again, guys, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye-bye.